Picks his way to the right and is tripped up, reaching to the end zone. Touchdown. What a start.
Give it to Reed, and there he goes. Nobody's going to catch him. Touchdown.
It's caught. Jeremiah Smith. Touchdown, Ohio State. The legend grows.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. Hope you guys are having a wonderful night on this Tuesday night. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus of Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the season, as well as Tuesday night. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campusofcanton.com. Subscribe there with any of our phenomenal tiers. We got content ranging on all sorts of college football games, whether it is CFF, Devy, C2C, college, DFS, underdog, best balls. If you play it, then we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, right now, if you want to show the support, show the show. Wow, I never realized how hard that was to say. Show the show some direct support. Make sure when you sign up for one of our yearly membership tiers, you use one of those promo codes, and that is promo code Natty, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off your yearly membership. Again, that is promo code Natty, N-A-T-T-Y. If you can't do that, do me a favor real quick for those of you watching live. Leave a like down below. Make sure you're commenting in the chat all night long. I appreciate the back and forth we get during these shows all the time. And make sure that you are subscribed to the channel if you are not already. Not only does that show us support, but also shows the entire game of college fantasy football in general a ton of support. If you have any further questions or want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty. Welcome to week 12, everybody. I was going to ask a question there, and my voice box, whatever you want to call it, just decided to quit forming words on me. Who's in the playoffs? Who's excited to be competing for their championship? I know I am. I'm definitely made the playoffs in several of my leagues. Just missed out on a couple more, including the Kings Classic. That one was kind of a bummer this year because my claim to fame is that I've made the playoffs in that league every single year. But fortunately, this year just wasn't it, and I'll have to work my way back up next year. And one of these years, I will win that championship. But c'est la vie. I got a lot of opportunities in other leagues. I'm sure you guys do as well. Pretty much, I have to imagine that you are not here unless you are in the playoffs. So that makes really a lot of sense. You guys know the drill at this point. This is a 1 hour office hours style show. You guys can come in here, ask your questions, mostly start-sit questions, I have to imagine, as far as the eye can see, as far as I can tell. But, we do also have our rest of season rankings over at campusofcanton.com. You can find them under the CFF tab there. They are updated weekly every Monday night. And you can check out, what players we expect to go off these next 3 weeks. That could be very, very important for you as you get into your playoff runs here in the next couple of weeks. So make sure you go check those out. If you see a player that's not on those rankings, but you still want to hear about it, feel free to drop a comment here in the chat, and we can get to them as best we can. And then if you got general questions about strategy, or, you're starting to already look to 2026, maybe you are somebody who, unfortunately is out of their playoffs for this year, or you're in a keeper in a dynasty league, and you just want to go ahead and start thinking about next year, I'm down for questions like that too. Again, speculation is always fun. So with that being said, let's get on over to our weekly CFF rankings over at campusofcanton.com. Again, these are different than our rest of the season rankings. These are just for this week. We can take a look at the projections for each of the questions that you guys provide me today. And then, like I said, you guys know the drill, but I will go ahead and just remind everybody the 3 requirements I have if you are going to leave me a start-sit question. Basically, no more than 3 players. I need you guys to try to narrow it down to 3 as best you can. Tell me how many you need to start, and also if you can give me opponents, that helps me out a ton. So, with that being said, I think this is the 3rd time I've said with that being said, and I think you guys are getting annoyed with me by now that we actually haven't gotten to questions yet. Let's finally do so. We'll start with Nathan Nokin's question here. He says, hey Nathan. Thanks for doing this for the playoffs. PPR league, pick one out of these two receivers. We got DeMarcus Lacey at Georgia State or Deuce Robinson going up against Virginia Tech. Lacey feels like he has the lower floor, but also the higher ceiling. It's interesting you asked this question, Nathan, mostly due to the fact that these are two guys that in my rest of season rankings rank much higher for these last 3 weeks than what we've gotten so far this year. So like if you take a look, or you guys can't see it, but if I look at my rankings, I can see that DeMarcus Lacey is currently wide receiver 54 on the year in terms of total points. Deuce Robinson's wide receiver 40 on the year. Meanwhile, they're my wide receivers 4 and 5 in terms of total points the rest of the season. Both of these guys have really, really good finishes to the season here. And obviously, as you can tell, I project them extremely well. And so I think you're both going to get good matchups this weekend. I really like all of the Marshall guys this week in terms of their potential to score a lot of points. I think they got their real bad matchup out of the way there early on. But let's go ahead and take a look at what the projections on Campus Canton have. We got DeMarcus Lacey and we got Deuce Robinson. So the fact that you got both of these guys on your team, Nathan, by the way, I think spells really, really good for you the rest of the season here. And yes, currently projections kind of agree with you that, Deuce Robinson going up against Akron this week, great matchup. That's not true. Florida State's not going up against Akron this week. They're going up against Akron literally played last night. What's going on here? That's not true at all. Virginia Tech. They're going up against Virginia Tech. You said it in your question. See, this is why I have you guys bring me the opponents, because this helps me out whenever something weird like this happens. So I wonder if that's playing into this projection here, but it's going to be a very similar thing in my own personal projections here as well. Let's see, week 12, I personally have Lacey just a little bit higher than Robinson. I've got Lacey at 20.4. You got Deuce Robinson at 19.1 in mine. You did say, full PPR? So add in maybe a little bit higher, but both these guys have gotten pretty good volume recently. But if I remember correctly, Lacey has been getting the volume, but the production hasn't really matched, right? This is here's the frustrating thing with Lacey recently. You get 11 targets versus Coastal Carolina, which is a very good matchup on paper. 5 receptions, 24 yards. Less than 5 yards per catch. Just abysmal. You can say that Coastal Carolina was heavily keying in on Lacey. That's fine. Same with JMU. JMU already pretty good defense. It makes sense that he could get 12 targets, 5 catches, 35 yards. The problem is I think that you don't have any kind of indication that that's going to stop. Meanwhile, Deuce Robinson, the production's been there every single week recently. He's been a top wide receiver over the last couple of weeks. I mean, look at this. 8 targets, 4 catches, 98 yards versus Stanford, 148 yards and touchdown versus Wake. Wake's a good defense. That's pretty solid. And then against Clemson, 124 yards. Didn't find the end zone, but still 9 catches in a full PPR league. You're sitting there pretty happy with it. I would go with Deuce. I think, like you said, he'll be the safer play. Lacey could pop off against a horrific Georgia State secondary. But here's also the other thing. Marshall and Antoine Roberts, their running back, I think is also in for a really good matchup against Georgia State there. And I think that will lead to some problems as well for Lacey in terms of reaching that ceiling that you're talking about. Versus, once again, I think Deuce Robinson, a very big part of that Florida State offense moving forward. So I would go with Robinson. Let's move on over to Brandon's question here. He says, thanks for the Jackson Harris start last week. Hey, man, I appreciate helping you out, man. Full PPR league. Need to start 2 of these running backs. We got Joe Jackson at Oklahoma State, Jakyle Middlebrook at Western Kentucky, or Robert Henry at UNC Charlotte. And we got a 4th one in here. Damon Claiborne versus UNC. I would say that off the top of my head, I would maybe lean a little bit away from Damon Claiborne, mostly because, again, that Wake Forest offense just sucks right now. And it's like they're not helping Claiborne out at all because they can't provide any kind of help beyond him. I mean, just look at the last 3 weeks. 3.2 yards per carry versus SMU, 1.9 yards versus Florida State, 3.0 yards versus Virginia. And you can argue that these are pretty good rushing defensive teams, right? And I would agree with you. But let's take a look at where North Carolina is. Oh, look at that. North Carolina, top 10 rushing defense in the country. I would maybe stay away from Damon Claiborne there. So that leaves us 3 guys left here. Joe Jackson, Oklahoma State. Obviously, the matchup there is very, very nice. Kyle Middlebrook at Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky, if I remember correctly, is also pretty solid versus. Oh, never mind. I'm a liar. They're pretty weak against the run. Maybe they're better against the pass. Remember, they're good at something defensively. So maybe I'm just mixing them up with another team because, trying to remember the defensive stats of 136 teams. Believe it or not, very hard. But yeah, Oklahoma State, probably one of the worst rushing defenses in the country. Where are they? Where are they? Okay, Oklahoma's number 2. That makes sense. Okay, number 99. So again, you're still bad in general. And then who's the last one? Oh yeah, Jacob Middlebrook. Oh, Charlotte or Robert Henry versus Charlotte. So I'll just look that up real quick. Yeah, Charlotte real bad defensively against the run. I think that this is one of those weeks where we can kind of see a bounce back from Robert Henry. Obviously, he's been on a real skid recently, dropping down in the performance rankings recently after a very hot start for the season. Really, a lot of it has to do with, as you can see here, just 12 carries, 12 carries, 12 carries, 16 carries, 10 carries. Just not much going for him here. And does not help at all that he has scored 2 touchdowns in his last 5 games. That sucks a lot. But given the matchup versus Charlotte, I do think this is a bounce back spot for him. So I would trust Robert Henry one last time into this matchup here. Joe Jackson's an interesting one. I haven't followed Joe Jackson a ton, but obviously with, Dylan Edwards going out, there's a possibility here of him popping off. And yes, you can see over the last 2 weeks, 20 carries versus Kansas, 27 carries versus TCU. Never has really been elite in terms of efficiency, but if you can get 20 carries and, 4 yards per carry, that's probably good enough to reach 100 yards. And again, Oklahoma State's a pretty rough defense there. Got plenty of receiving work as well, which helps him out a ton. You say PPR, it is full PPR. Meanwhile, Middlebrook, let's check on Middlebrook here real quick. Because I remember I said that he's kind of an unsung hero for CFF, but yeah, look at the last couple of weeks. The production's been rough. The receiving work has been fantastic, right? But he's also been heavily reliant on these touchdowns here. This kind of stuff can really fall flat all of a sudden. It does help that Western Kentucky is, again, rough against the run. But I think I would end up going with Joe Jackson and Robert Henry. Let's go ahead and plug these into projections real quick just to see where projections have these guys at. Joe Jackson, 15.9 fantasy points. Middlebrook, a little higher there. We got Robert Henry. And he's the highest of the 4 so far, and then Claiborne. So yeah, I would sit Claiborne. I think it's a bad matchup for him, and especially with how Wake Forest's offense has been, I wouldn't trust that, and projections fully agree with me there. Meanwhile, according to the rest of the projections, you got 3 of our top 20 running backs here. I would go Henry and Jackson just because I think those are the best matchups. Middlebrook relying on some things that, I'm not entirely sure are sustainable. But according to projections, Middlebrook, Henry, you're good to go. So whichever one you think you want to rely on there, Brandon, we go with that. Next, we'll start with Bill Lacing's question here. He says, hey, Jared. Hey, Bill. Got a quarterback one here for you. Sit one of the below. It's a 6-point passing touchdown league. We got Haynes King at Boston College, Drew Messenbaker at UAB, or Samari Collier at Georgia Southern. Drew and Haynes have been fire. Collier is hot. There's no way in hell I think you can sit Haynes King. I mean, Boston College's defense has been terrible. Haynes King's been absolute fire this year. I think, if I remember correctly, if I look at his fantasy points per game ranking, he might be number 2, might be close to number 1. He's been number 1 last 2 weeks. You have to think that bumps him up quite a bit. Yeah, okay, yeah, he is the number 1 quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game. Bill, there's no way you can sit Haynes King. Again, we got him projected as QB3 on the week. I don't think, again, there's no way you can sit him. So then it comes down to Messamaker or Collier. Collier, like you said, been so hot. And a lot of it has to do with his rushing. Georgia Southern, the worst rushing defense in the entire country. And so I think that Collier will benefit greatly from that. Your 6-point passing touchdown does make me want to go with Messamaker just a little bit more. But there's this really annoying nuisance called Caleb Hawkins that has really jumped out and really, really likes to suck up a lot of touchdowns. Meanwhile, Collier is a lot better at sucking up his own team's touchdowns and really kind of monopolizing those touchdowns. So I think I'm actually going to go with Collier here. He's been hot. Also, if you don't start him this week, it's real hard to justify him starting the rest of the way because he's got South Carolina in week 13. You got James Madison as his final matchup in week 14 in championship week. So it's like, if you don't start him this week, you might as well drop him and try to pick up somebody else. So start him this week, rely on him one last time, and I say go from there, Bill. So moving on to Aaron's question. Hi, Jared. Hi, Aaron. I must bench one of Jeffrey Pittman going up against Texas State, Javen Nicholas versus UTSA, Jeremy Bernard versus Oklahoma. Probably need a ceiling, but if early games go poor for my opponent, I might go floor. Half-point PPR. Thanks. So, yeah. I think that the easy bench for me here is Jeremy Bernard versus Oklahoma. Jeremy Bernard is he is a good, talented wide receiver. He is also not somebody that I am fully relying on. He's wide receiver 26 on the year, but a lot of it came in early games. He had one good game a couple weeks ago, but it's been real boom or bust for him as the season's gone along. Like, look at these first couple weeks. 18.9, 20.2, 20.4. Has had one 20-point game since. He's had some good floor games, don't get me wrong, but if you're looking for ceiling, I think you got to go Pittman and you got to go Javen Nicholas. Those are just better matchups in my opinion. Because, again, Oklahoma's defense, we saw earlier when we were kind of looking at it, they're number 2 in the country in rushing. Their passing defense has been fantastic as well. Yeah, 34 in the country, so not, elite, but they are certainly still a really good defense. I have to imagine that Vegas is predicting a relatively low-scoring game for that one. Where are you? Yeah. Over under a 45.5. Bernard is competing with the likes of Ryan Williams, Josh Cuevas at tight end. Isaiah Horton's out there. And, Jam Miller is a decent receiver in his own right. So how many touchdowns do you see Bama scoring in that Oklahoma game? I personally see probably a max of 4. And while they have, their touchdowns have definitely skewed more towards the pass, so that helps Bernard a little bit. I don't know if I'm quite ready to fully rely on that. Meanwhile, again, you look at these matchups with Texas State Southern Miss, over under 65.5. If Pittman's good to go, we know for a fact that staff is going to ride him into the absolute dirt. Texas State's rushing defense has been not great this year. Yeah, 111th in the country, giving up 250 on the ground. You have to imagine that's a really good spot for Pittman. Again, assuming he's healthy. Nicholas, not quite as cut and dry, but, UTSA's defense, not great here. Again, 98th in the country, giving up 175 yards through the air. Recently, Nicholas has really kind of turned a corner. I really do think that the quarterback situation kind of settling itself out has helped him out a lot. He's averaging 8 targets per game, been very efficient, especially these last 2 games. A lot of big plays coming from him. I'm particularly impressed with his performance against North Texas and East Carolina, not just because of the production here, but North Texas, like in terms of stats, is a top 10 team against the pass. Now, granted, a lot of that comes from the fact that they're so poor against the run that teams don't really throw on them that much. But even still, like, the fact that Nicholas was able to perform as well as he did, given that information, really solid. East Carolina has been pretty solid against the pass as well, 90 yards there. You get by far his best matchup here. If he gets, 7 to 9 targets again in this game, I feel pretty good about him hitting a pretty solid ceiling. So, Aaron, I would say sit Bernard, go with Pittman, go with Nicholas, and just to confirm here, let's see what projections have to say. Jeffrey Pittman at 13.22. I think if this was a betting line, I would hit that over so dang quick. Yeah, I gotta say I fully disagree with these projections. Having Jeremy Bernard at wide receiver 8 on the week against an Oklahoma defense that has been so solid. I don't know if I agree with these projections really at all. But that's just my opinion. Again, a lot of data goes into this, so maybe there's something there that I'm missing. But yeah. Hope that answers your question there, Aaron. Let's move on to Footballer One's question. He says, "Hey, Jared, choosing between one of Devon Claiborne versus UNC, Dior Hubbard versus Arizona State, or Kejuan Brown versus Clemson." Thank you. I was about to make this one quick because we had already discussed Claiborne, and we already discussed that UNC's defense has been pretty solid. Problem is Clemson's defense against the run. Their secondary is terrible, but Clemson against the run, 17th in the country. And then you also got Arizona State mixed in here, top 35 unit in the country. So you got 3 guys here that none of which are really have great matchups. So what I will say here, though, is that UNC's defense, great against the run, still solid versus the pass. I expect that to be a relatively low-scoring game for the most part. Dior Hubbard, Arizona State, solid against both the run and the pass. Kejuan Brown going up against Clemson. I teased this already, that Clemson's secondary has been a serious problem for them this year. Louisville's got really good receivers. They got a really solid quarterback in Miller Moss who can distribute the ball to them. And that tells me that Louisville's still going to be able to move the ball on Clemson's defense if they are smart about it. And that tells me that even if Kejuan Brown might be limited to 3 yards a carry, there's still going to be touchdown opportunities that I don't think that Hubbard and Claiborne are going to get in their games. To kind of prove my point here, let's go with North Carolina Wake Forest. Over under 38.5. Good Lord, I was expecting low. I didn't expect that low. That's crazy. Then we got West Virginia versus Arizona State. Again, another low over under 48.5. Meanwhile, Clemson and Louisville, not a great over-under, obviously, but about a field goal more than, Arizona State, West Virginia. I like the ability that for Louisville to still be able to move the ball on Clemson. So I think we go with Kejuan Brown here and just hope for some touchdowns there. Let me plug those into projections here real quick, just to get that opinion as well. Kejuan. Okay, so projections are liking Hubbard the most. I can understand that the volume's going to be there for him, but I think Kejuan Brown against Clemson, to me, is still the best matchup. So, moving on to William. William says, "Hey, Jared." Hey, William. 2 quarterback league, 6-point passing touchdowns, starting Barnett as 1 QB. That's a smart move. Barnett, as you can see here, is projected as our number 1 quarterback for the week. So now we need to pick another one. We got Veltkamp going up against Florida Atlantic, or excuse me, Veltkamp of Florida Atlantic going up against Tulane, or we can do Sawyer Robertson Baylor going up against Utah. Just off the top of my head, I'm leaning towards Veltkamp because I think that Tulane matchup's a little bit better versus Utah. That defense is pretty solid. Let's start this time with the projections and see where we kind of go from there. Projections like Sawyer Robertson, QB 24 on the week. Yeah, Veltkamp down there at QB 29 facing Tulane. I'm curious to see what my own projections have here. Because let's see. Oh, I can't spell. Sawyer Robertson, I have at 22.0 fantasy points this week versus Veltkamp. I have as 24.3. Okay, so I have them basically flipped in compared to C2C's projections here. And so yeah, I think this might come down to, let's see what with both of those guys being passing quarterbacks, the amount that teams are giving up through the passing game is obviously going to be very important here. So Tulane's passing defense a lot worse than I remember. I once again, I think I had it flipped in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, Tulane gives up a bunch on the ground. Nope. They're terrible against the pass, giving up 257.9 per game. That's a good opportunity for Veltkamp. Meanwhile, Utah, number 5 in the country versus the pass. That spells disaster, in my opinion, for Sawyer Robertson. And so we'll see. Let's see if Baylor, Utah, over under of 60. That's kind of surprising, actually. So they're expecting Baylor to still be able to move the ball on the ground. That'll probably help Sawyer Robertson's touchdown opportunities. But let's see if maybe there's FAU. There we go. Yeah, but then you got FAU against Tulane, over under 63.5. They are near 2.5 touchdown underdogs, but also when they're going to pass a ton regardless, so I don't think the spread is nearly going to throw things off. So yeah, I think I'm still going to go Veltkamp here. I think that passing game's starting to figure things out. He finally figured out the throw to Easton Mester for a touchdown button that's been missing all season. So hopefully we continue to see a lot more of that. So, I see a couple comments here in the recent stuff to see. Brett's making a lot of comments saying, feel like Claiborne can have a decent week. He looks healthier than I've seen him all year. Brett's predicting 100 yards, 3 catches for 20 yards, and a touchdown. I'd love to see it, Brett, but again, like you say he's looking healthier, but like his efficiency, as I kind of pointed out earlier, is definitely making me worry. Like if he going up against, SMU, Florida State, UAV, granted again, tough rushing defenses to face here, and barely breaks 3 yards per rush in 2 of those games and is under 2 in another, I'm not seeing where, I'm not seeing where you're seeing that he's looking healthier. If anything, I'm seeing that he's looking worse than where he was earlier this year. And again, add in that UNC's run defense has been really, really solid this year. And I've seen them shut down some pretty good running backs. Like Jamari Taylor struggled in that North Carolina game. I just think that it's a big risk, in my opinion, to play Claiborne this week. Like I'm sitting Claiborne in a couple of spots where I have him. So, all right, let's go back here. Let's get onto B. Johnstone. Excuse me. Need 2 of these for flex spots. We got Wayshawn Parker versus Baylor, Ruben Owens versus South Carolina, Trey Wisner versus Georgia. I don't love Yes, Brett, I would agree that like his usage is way up, but getting 20 touches but less than 3 yards per carry isn't gonna help you much. Anyway, back to John B. Johnstone's question. I don't love any of these options if I'm being real, B. Johnstone. I think you're in a rough patch here because Baylor is a solid matchup. Like their defense is not good compared to, Ruben Owens going up against South Carolina and, Wisner going up against Georgia. Georgia's got a really solid run defense. That's really what's kind of kept them in a lot of games or allowed them to win in a lot of games this year. Georgia's vulnerability, if it has one, is against the pass. Obviously, it's getting better as the season's going along, but Georgia, where are we? I think top 20. They were top 15, but yeah, they're giving up just over 100 yards per game. You know that they're going to try to mix in, obviously, a little bit of Arch. They're going to mix in a little bit of CJ Baxter. I just see a really low floor for Wisner if Georgia's able to shut down their run. Like, let's remember that, and College Football Nerds pointed this out in their preview that, actually, no, I think it might have been Josh Pate, but Texas ran combined in the 2 games they faced against Georgia last year, less than 50 yards. Like, they could not run the ball on Georgia last year. Georgia, in my opinion, has a better front this year in terms of being able to stop the run. I think Texas is worse at running the ball this year. I think that there's a lot of question marks there that make me think that Wisner is a pretty big sit here. Meanwhile, let's take a look at South Carolina, because I haven't spent a ton of time on South Carolina this year, but yep, there they are. Okay, so a little below average, actually, against the run. For some reason, I'm thinking that South Carolina's defense was a little bit more stout than I was giving them credit for. So there's opportunity there. Yeah. And then you got Wayshawn Parker versus Baylor. Again, like I said, the Baylor matchup's really nice, but Parker, if I remember correctly, has not... Where's Wayshawn? Oh, there he is. I just scooted right on past him. Okay, never mind. He's had a couple of really solid weeks recently. Forgive me. I have not watched a ton of Utah recently, so forgive my ignorance here. So yeah, 2 back-to-back rushing 100-yard games here. Solid volume against Cincinnati a couple of weeks ago. That definitely helps him out quite a bit. Yeah, I think I'd be comfortable starting. I think starting Parker here should be fine. He's been on a bit of a hot streak going up against that Baylor defense, which pretty vulnerable versus the run. 115th versus the run. I would say, yeah, go Parker. Go Ruben Owens. He's a clear back for Texas A&M. They're going up against South Carolina. I would say the gap between Parker and Wisner is much bigger than what we're seeing here in the projections. Again, I would not trust Wisner against Georgia this week. I'm probably going to regret saying that as he rips off a 85-yard touchdown or something on Saturday night, but I'm just saying I wouldn't trust that, given Texas's recent history against Georgia. Moving on to William. William says, start one running back in half-point PPR, Cameron Dickey versus UCF or Lincoln Pear versus Southern Miss. Dickey, as frustrating as some of these, or as both him and Williams have been to predict for Texas Tech, I think he's still a top 12 running back on the year. So just going with the risk of starting Dickey, you can hit real big. Obviously, I think it's like he hits like 10 points or he hits like 35 points. I don't think there's really a lot of in between when it comes to Dickey. Meanwhile, Pear has been really solid recently. Our projections do like Pear quite a bit more. I should scroll down so you can actually see. So yeah, Pear, we got a 16.66. Cameron Dickey, a little bit further down at RB33 at 15.6. So about a point difference between the two. Let me take a look at the rushing defenses here. So Southern Miss, 80th, so a little below average. Meanwhile, UCF, if I remember correctly, has been real. Oh, never mind. Not as solid against the run as I thought. It's their passing. It's their passing that they're actually. Again, I'm trying to keep track of like all these different teams. And yep, there it is. Yeah, UCF is top 20 versus the pass. But Okay, so their average versus the run, that's going to be a point in favor of Dickey for sure. Let's take a look at what Vegas has got between these two. So UCF, Texas Tech, over under 48.5. Not a ton of scoring opportunities, although they do expect Texas Tech obviously to win this game pretty handedly. So they're predicting about 36-ish points for Texas Tech, so 5 touchdowns. Do you trust that Cameron Dickey can score at least one of those touchdowns? I think there's a pretty solid case for that. Meanwhile, Texas State and Southern Miss is the game right above it. Tons of opportunities for scoring opportunities here, like 65.5 over under, back and forth affair. I think I'm leaning towards pair of the two, because especially in a blowout with Texas Tech, they could pull Cameron Dickey early. Again, they're gunning for playoffs. They're gunning for a Big 12 championship. If they feel like the game is being handled early, Dickey might see less opportunity, versus I think Pear will be fully involved in the Southern Miss game for a good chunk of it. So that's the way that I would lean there, William. I'm going to take a sip of juice real quick. And then we'll go to Miss Rev's question. Hey, Jared. Hey, Miss Rev. Clinched the playoffs thanks to you. Hey, you had to be the one to actually put those players into your lineup, so you deserve all the credit, Miss Rev. Can you give us some early thoughts on guys you think could go off in the next 2 weeks? Well, Miss Rev, again, not to keep patting myself on the back here, but if you do go over to campus2canton.com and check out the rest of season rankings, that will give you a really, really good idea of guys that I think will pop off. We talked about 2 wide receivers earlier tonight with DeMarcus Lacey and Deuce Robinson, who aren't the highest in terms of their actual point totals on the season to this point, but my rest of season projections love that they could take a huge bounce here. Jaden Barnes is a guy that, you know, could pop off these last couple of weeks. Jace Brown out of Kansas State. Obviously, these are guys that are mostly rostered in a lot of leagues. So you're probably looking for guys that are relatively available. And again, unfortunately, there's not really a lot of those guys still out there. Again, waivers have been hard these last couple of weeks. I would go and check the waiver show I put out earlier this week. But looking at these rest of season rankings, there's not really a lot of guys that really pop off as like guys that are clearly still on the waiver wire. If CJ Williams continues to be banged up and out for Miami, maybe take a look at Josiah Trader. He might still be available in a lot of leagues. Katie Hutchinson out of Western Kentucky could make a big jump these last couple of weeks. Obviously, Sheldon Sampson's a guy that was still relatively available earlier this week. So, so that's all wide receivers. Some running backs that could really pop off, like Antoine Roberts out of Marshall. The rest of season here for Marshall, I think, could really, really help him out. Let me pull up that schedule real quick. Their rest of season schedule. Yeah, Georgia State, App State, and Georgia Southern. Georgia State and Georgia Southern are 2 of the bottom 3 teams in the country in terms of rushing yards per game. App State pretty stout versus the run, but O.J. Arnold was able to run for 100 yards versus them. So I would say that Antoine Roberts should be able to do so as well. Jaden Thomas out of UNLV has a lot of good matchups here at the end. Both the Penn State running backs, Katron Allen, you could probably pick up Nick Singleton in a couple of leagues from people that have dropped him out of frustration. He could get on a hot streak here to end the year to kind of salvage his draft stock here. Some other guys that are expected to do well towards the end of the season here. Gavin Sawchuk out of Florida State. They got a pretty solid end of season schedule. Trey Wisner is projected to do pretty well in my projections. Not this week, but the final 2 weeks. Is expecting him to do a little bit better than what he's done so far this season. And then last but not least, let's check out quarterback, see if there's anybody that really pops out here. Skylar Locklear out of UTEP has some pretty solid matchups here towards the end with UTEP. My projections see him scoring 20-plus point games in all of them. Carlos Aria Wilson's pretty rostered in most leagues. Yeah, quarterbacks, there's not really a lot of guys that are making the big jump up. I see a lot of guys that are kind of predicted to finish lower than what they've done so far. Dwayne Lunch Winfield, if he's still available in your league, definitely go grab him. Amari Odom out of Kennesaw State might be a pretty solid grab, but no guys that I would say are really going to, torch it the last couple of weeks. Jeremy Daniel, welcome, sir. I don't think I've got a question from you before, Jeremy. If you have, my apologies, but I always appreciate unfamiliar faces. He says, should I play Ja'Kirian Turney from Pitt against Notre Dame this week or Mike Washington? Thanks for the help. The unfortunate thing, Jeremy, here is that you got two guys here that I like, but they both have really tough matchups. Notre Dame, their defense was pretty vulnerable earlier in the year, but they've really kind of locked in since. They've had a really big turnaround, and really they've never had a problem stopping the run. There's been a lot of teams like that this year, between like Clemson and Georgia, Notre Dame as well, where their run game defense has been super solid, but the secondaries have just been struggling so much. And I do think that is partially just the age of college football that we're in, with all these spread option offenses. It's really, really hard to defend in the secondary, especially if your team's not generating pass rush, which I do believe all three of Georgia, Clemson, and Notre Dame are struggling to do so this year. So, but regardless, let's take a look at what projections are looking at here. So Ja'Kirian Turner, RB49 for us, about 14 points. And then you got Mike Washington going up against LSU. Yeah, neither projections don't really love either one of these guys. Mike Washington maybe a little bit of a benefit there. I guess the thought that I can kind of, or the narrative I can kind of tell myself here, is that Washington could benefit from an LSU team that looks an awful lot like what Florida looked like last week. A lot of people are kind of looking at that Florida game this past week and looking at, like, oh my God, Florida was terrible against Kentucky. They got blown the absolute hell out. Yeah, because they've quit. Like, Florida got up for one last game, and that was against Georgia. That was their big moment. That was we can salvage the season if we can just get a huge upset win over Georgia. Didn't happen. LSU, I think, is in the same boat here, where they wanted to get up for one last time. Like, Brian Kelly's out. Let's salvage this season by getting a huge upset win over Alabama. Didn't happen. What else does LSU really have to play for at this point? Like, what are these defense? Like, I mean, obviously their own pride and everything, right? But I do think there's a possibility we see just a drop off in LSU's performance, especially defensively, just because they're not going to be able to play with as much fire and passion. That's a narrative I can tell myself. Meanwhile, Notre Dame knows if they lose another game, they're out of the playoff discussion. So I think that right now I would lean Mike Washington over LSU just because of that. I do want to take a look at the opportunity for scoring that we could have here. Arkansas, LSU, yeah, there we go. LSU still favored by a touchdown, but over under of 56.5. So we're looking at Arkansas still being able to put up 24 points-ish. I would say Mike Washington getting 1 out of 3 touchdowns for Arkansas is a pretty safe bet. Meanwhile, let's go take a look at Pitt Notre Dame. I know this is the game of the week. Okay, not as low scoring as I was kind of expecting it to be. Notre Dame obviously a pretty heavy favorite here, almost 2 touchdowns. So maybe you bring him back. Brett brings up the point about Desmond Reed, which based on last I saw, it doesn't sound like Des Reed's going to really be back, like, fully involved anytime soon. And so I'm not as worried about, like, Reed coming in and just taking over as the RB1. But he could come in enough to be just annoying enough. And I think that's just another point in, Mike Washington's favor. So, Jeremy, I think all of this is kind of leading me to believe that Washington is the better pick here. Projections line up. I think the narrative lines up a bit more. And I think that and then like Brett said, just the possibility of Reed even coming back and messing with Turner just adds another point to Washington. So everything's pointing one way. Probably means Turner's about to rip off 40 points, and I'm going to feel like an idiot. But that's fine. It happens. Felipe Mendoza up next. Hope all is well, Jared. Appreciate that, Felipe. How much do you trust Makai Lemon against Iowa this week? He blew up last week, of course. So, yeah. That was when I saw people over on the CFF subreddit, which I don't know if you guys ever really go over there, but I got to call them out on this. They were giving Joe Arpazi some crap over there, which they shouldn't, because Joe Arpazi is an incredibly smart guy and runs some really, really good CFF content. If you're not subscribed to him over at Purple Rain, shout out Joe. But he had Makai Lemon as a sit last week, and then Makai Lemon popped off last week. Just being honest, I would have had the same thing. Makai Lemon and Jaden Mayava benefited massively this first half of the season from a lot of really weak secondaries that they were able to take advantage of. Now, clearly last week, the lesson learned there was that Northwestern's, passing defense looked really solid on paper, but they were also the beneficiaries of a lot of really weak passing games that kind of inflated that, and their secondary is actually a lot weaker than we were kind of led to believe. Which, mistake learned. Let's try to apply that this week. Let's take a look at what Iowa's had to face this year. They've had to face Iowa State, UMass. They got Rutgers. They had to face Indiana. Indiana, one of the best passing games right now. They held Fernando Mendoza to 233. That's pretty solid. They held Rutgers and Ethan Kaliakmanis to 330. Okay, not so great. Let's see. They got Wisconsin. Obviously, that'll inflate the numbers a little bit. Penn State, that'll inflate the numbers a little bit. Minnesota, that'll inflate the numbers a little bit there as well. Oregon, though, let's take a look at what Dante Moore was able to do last week. They held Dante Moore to 112 yards. This is a guy that a lot of people consider to be a first-round quarterback going into next year, right? I think Iowa's defense is pretty legit. I think that this is one of those games where we can kind of expect for Makai Lemon to kind of have one of these drop-off games, very similar to what he had a couple of weeks ago, right? Against Nebraska. Like, I told everybody I was worried about Jaden Mayava and Makai Lemon to go into that Nebraska game, and guess what? They had one of their worst games. My projections are predicting them to have another one this week. So I would say I would be a little hesitant with Lemon, but I would also say that only do so if you're very, very sure about the guy you're replacing with. Otherwise, as a lot of people said on the CFF subreddit, they're like, well, you just got to start your studs at this point. I mean, fair, right? Like, again, Lemon's got you to this point, so it's hard to sit him, but also, like, you got to be smart a little bit. Like, CFF is a game of matchups, right? And so I would take a look. You offer up Parker Kingston here in the chat, so I'll go ahead and plug him in along with Lemon into our projections. Our projections still like Lemon this week, at least in terms of the ones here at campusacant.com. I will tell you right now, my projections do not like him nearly as much. I got him about 5 points lower here. Parker Kingston, you got TCU. That's a much better matchup, I would say, just on paper. Yeah, over under 51.5 here. BYU favored by about 4.5, so there should be plenty of scoring opportunities there. I'll go ahead and so a little bit lower scoring of a matchup here between Iowa and USC. Let me just look real quick in terms of my own projections. My own projections have Makai Lemon at about 11.7 fantasy points this week. Let's see what I have for Kingston. Kingston I have at 14.6. Kingston, I don't know if he fully hits that, like, I would trust Kingston to fully pop off this week realm. I guess it would really depend, Felipe, on the rest of your wide receiver, which wide receiver is already going to be a very up and down position. If you feel safe about the rest of your wide receivers, I would go with Bachmeier. If you realize that your whole team's going to be boom or bust, might as well go with Lemon and just hope that he can get a bust that might offset or might hopefully get a boom week that can offset the rest, a potential bust elsewhere on your wide receiver team. So I hope that makes sense. I was kind of not making it up, but like I was kind of forming that thought in my head as I was saying it. So basically the idea is, I'll say it one more time here. If you feel good about your wide receiver room and you feel very safe about it, go with Parker Kingston just to kind of keep that floor really nice. If you're afraid of one of your wide receivers busting elsewhere, Mekhi Lemon still is going to have the ceiling here, as we saw last week. And so with that being said, yeah, I don't know. That's a real tough one, Felipe. I would say I'd still I don't like that matchup with Iowa. I'd say I lean Kingston, but it's a real small lean. So let's see. I see back and forth. So yeah, back and forth between two people saying that Isaac Brown's off the injury report, but also somebody saying that he is out for the game. Let me just do a little bit of Twitter detecting here real quick. I'm sure that if there's an injury report that I can find it pretty quick. Isaac Brown. Yeah, update to the update. We are now told Isaac Brown should be listed as out for the game against LSU. So the omission was an error. So let's see. Baylor and Ben says, I don't appreciate all the Baylor slander. Sorry, Ben. I gotta help people. I gotta be as objective as I can. Continue. Trying to make sure I get to questions here. All right. Todd Skids. Alonzo Barnett versus App State or Barnes versus UNLV? Man, I love me some Barnes, but Alonzo Barnett is our number one projected quarterback for this week. Going up against App State, their passing defense is absolutely atrocious. Their rushing defense looks solid on paper, but over the last couple of weeks have definitely seen some vulnerability there. In fact, let me look it up. I remember correctly. Yeah, so they have been giving up on the season 131.8 rushing yards per game, but in their last 3 games, they're 180th. So if you were to just do that, that's like saying that they're outside the top 100 in rushing. There's vulnerability there. Barnett's going to go off. The question is, can Bryson Barnes compete? And our projections like him, QB 29, but only about 3 points behind in terms of projectability. Utah State versus UNLV, I have to imagine is one of over under 71.5. UNLV a touchdown favorite. There's going to be a ton of points scored in that game. Versus James Madison, App State lower over under, but James Madison favored by 21 points. I think you go with the hot hand here. I think you go. I think you stick with Alonzo Barnett. I am curious to see who else you would consider there, Todd, because I would try to find a way to get both of those guys in your starting lineup, unless it's a 1 QB league. So, the Jags Beast, Liam Zarka versus UConn, Marcel Reed versus South Carolina, or Alonzo Barnett versus App State. Start 1. All right, we just talked Alonzo Barnett. Talked about how he's the number 1 overall player for our projections this week. My projections are very similar. They both like this matchup a lot for Alonzo Barnett. But let's see how far of a difference there is between him and Zarka. Not much. And then Reed against South Carolina. Here we go, Marcel Reed. Yeah. Jags Beast, I don't know if there's really a bad choice between all 3 of these guys. I would say maybe keep away from Marcel Reed against South Carolina because South Carolina's defense might be vulnerable, but there is still a lot of talent there. And so it's one of those, any given Saturday, you put the right kind of plays together and they could cause hell for Marcel Reed. And so maybe stay away from that. Stick with your G5 guys here. Air Force versus UConn, I cannot imagine I know that it'll probably be a high-scoring game. Yeah, 63.5 over-under. UConn only a 7-point favorite kind of surprises me. Yeah, I don't know. I think I still lean Barnett because he could absolutely. Well, so can Sarka though. That's the tough part. Both of those guys are league winners. Sarka's been on I don't want to say a skid because he's still putting up points, but definitely has slowed down quite a bit these last couple of weeks. To the point, I think he's only scoring, 20. If this is slowing down, you're still feeling real good. Versus, again, Barnett's been absolutely on fire recently as well. Yeah. I don't think there's I don't think there's a wrong answer between Zarka or Barnett. I say lean Barnett just because of his ability to be able to put it together a 45-plus point game. We've seen it do it twice. So, yeah, I legitimately don't think there's a bad answer between those two. So, all right, Brett, you're gonna finish us off tonight. Sorry for those of you that put 2 questions in the chat, but I am a little tired, and so I might end up ending the stream a few minutes early here. But what better way to end our show tonight than to discuss a kicker question of all questions from Brett. He says, are we allowed to ask kicker questions? You absolutely are. He wants to know Dylan Ramos at home versus Arkansas. That's the LSU kicker. Or Peyton Woodring at home versus Texas. This is one of those deals where I think that again, this is absolutely a spot where you need to just go ahead and take a look at team totals and just kind of bet around that. LSU, Arkansas, 56.5. Over under, you're looking at LSU scoring about 31 points in that game. I think there's a possibility that they could kick, 3-ish field goals. Arkansas's defense will give up enough points that they've been terrible all year. Versus Georgia and Texas, over under 48.5. That could very well be a game, though, where Texas buckles down in the red zone a lot and Georgia's forced to kick a field goal a lot. Yeah, that does kind of scream field goal central, where both teams end up, where it could very well end up being that Georgia scores like 2 touchdowns and ends with 23 points with 3 field goals, and Texas could as well finish in that same range, so points will be at a relative premium. I say go Peyton Woodring just because of that dynamic. I do think that this is going to be a matchup where they'll be able to move it between the 20s a little bit, and that game will be decided in the red zone and who can kind of force the most field goals. And so, yeah, I would go with Peyton Woodring, not at all just because he's my dog. So, alrighty. Again, you guys were awesome. You guys were super fun. I love the questions tonight. A lot of good variety. I hope you guys got some good information about it. Brett said at one point that I was locked in. I appreciate that. I didn't feel fully locked in throughout some of it, so I appreciate that it at least came across good to you guys. Yeah, appreciate you guys coming in tonight. You guys were awesome, and again, I'm glad we're still able to get like a really good. I think I'm glad we're able to still get some really good questions and really good interaction with these here late in the season. I was kind of afraid at one point that things were going to slow down to the point where I was never going to be able to truly fill an hour with this content. And you guys, like I said, you guys are bringing in great questions still, and you're doing a fantastic job. Hope to see you guys all back here next week, because that means you have won your playoff matchups, obviously. But until then, we have come to the end of the stream. Appreciate all of you guys for listening. If you're listening to this later, appreciate you guys listening there as well. And if you guys have not already, please make sure you leave a like, a comment, and a subscribe. If you're on YouTube, if you're on the podcast, listen to this later. Make sure you follow the show. Make sure you leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you guys check out the rest of the Campus to Canton Podcast Network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. We'll see you guys back here next Monday, where we got more waiver wire pickups, and hopefully that you are headed to your league semifinals. Till then, appreciate all of you guys. Have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.